Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is on Appreciative Inquiry, learning from what works, and also we'll discuss why it features in this year's conference. Today's panellist is Sherry Fuller, who is a TCI associate and also an expert in Appreciative Inquiry. The session will be 10 minutes of presentation from Sherry and then 10 minutes for your questions. So please do submit your questions via the dashboard. I will now hand you over to Sherry Fuller.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm not so sure about being an expert. I had a teacher who used to tell me that an expert was a has-been under pressure. So I don't know about that one, but certainly I'm an Appreciative Inquiry practitioner, and hopefully I can give you a good flavour in our short time together today about what AI is, so that you might be hungry to learn a bit more, either at our forthcoming training course or by coming along to the conference and attending our workshop. So I'll start with just a very quick introduction to myself. I work for the local authority in Southend-on-Sea, where I've been for quite a long time, about 15 years, and I've always had a role that's to do with communicating and consulting with people in some guise or other. I spent quite a lot of time in the social care department talking to people about those services, and nowadays I work in public health. So there's always plenty of opportunity to work with the public as well as with our own staff and partners. And I've been working with Appreciative Inquiry since 2008. And I've gone through the accreditation program attached to Case Western University in the States. That doesn't mean I did my training in the States, which would have been quite nice, but I've gone through the accreditation program. And obviously I do a bit of freelance work, mostly with the Consultation Institute, where I teach people some of the principles about using Appreciative Inquiry. If you've not come across it before, AI isn't actually a new thing. It's been around since around 1980. When the guy who developed it, called Dr. David Cooper-Ryder, was carrying out his PhD in organisational development, and he kind of figured out that talking to people about what works well, what's good about this organisation, created much more dynamic conversations and useful conversations than the usual approach of tell me about what's wrong here, tell me about what needs fixing. So he developed Appreciative Inquiry around that generative approach of let's talk about the good things, let's talk about what success looks like so we can look to replicate that success and build upon that. So that's kind of where it comes from. So it's strength-based is how it's typically spoken about, because we're working on what we know is a strong foundation, and it really harnesses the power of stories too. And I'm sure you can all think about examples of the power of narrative. It's often used everywhere in marketing by journalists and of course by politicians, and it's a very powerful way to work when you're working with people in systems, whether that be an organisation or your community, and I work frequently with both of those things. In terms of its application for us as people that go through doing a lot of consultation work, it can really be used in any situation where you want to bring around about change, hopefully sustainable change. So it could be, you can actually use it one-to-one when you're coaching somebody to think about where they want to go, but more often as consultation practitioners, we're going to be working with larger groups of people, and it's very flexible. You could use it with a small team to think about where you want to go with your team or how you want to achieve a certain thing or fix a certain problem, or you could use it with hundreds of people because it scales up very easily. And you could use it because it's very flexible for a half-hour meeting that you have just to look at something in an appreciative way, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. Or you can use it, it can span 3 or 4 day summits involving thousands of people. I've tended not to be so involved with those really big things because they're rather expensive and people don't tend to have the resources to do them, but that's the kind of thing it can be used for. And consultation-wise, you really want to use it very early on. So in public health, where I work at the moment, we often use the approach when we're seeking to commission a new service or we're developing a new strategy for services, and we really want everyone's input as to what's important to be within that service and what it needs to deliver for people. You can use it further down the line when some decisions have been made and you're consulting about those decisions, but really it's really good at that beginning stage where you really want to harness the collective intelligence of the people that you're going to talk to, because it's a very involving process. So to come on to the process itself, which is the first slide that I think you probably see before you, which is the Appreciative Inquiry cycle. This is what we call the 5D model, and this helps us go through the process of working with Appreciative Inquiry. So the first one is define, and we look to find the positive focus of our inquiry as opposed to the deficit that we might traditionally work with. So as an example, if I think about a piece of work I was involved in, developing a new mental health strategy. But the positive focus there was to think about, what does it look like when people are enjoying good mental health or are managing their mental health in a positive way, in a way that enables them to be part of society, part of community, and to get on with their life independently. So we knew that when we held an event where we invited people with lived experience of mental health problems, as well as practitioners and professionals, whatever that might look like for you. So that's kind of the positive framing. Just as another couple of examples as well, say internally, a problem that a lot of organisations have or worry about is staff attendance levels and staff sickness. With Appreciative Inquiry, rather than saying, why are people going off sick and how can we make sure they're in the office more often, develop a healthy, motivated workforce. And we'd say, what are people's habits, what are their behaviours, what are the conditions of their workplace that enable them to be healthy and to thrive, and therefore to have good attendance. So by taking that positive focus, we're hopefully going to end up building a much more sustainable environment where there's less sickness in the first place. So that's another example of how we shift our focus slightly at the definition stage to focus on, what is it that good looks like? What is this really about? What do we really want to bring about? So having defined what it is we want to talk to people about and what that focus is, so say for example it is your healthy workforce, we then move into the discover stage, which is where we have conversations with people to inquire into what that looks like. Now, we have a set way of doing this. We get together as many people as we can who will have a story to tell about this, and it's very important at this stage to be very inclusive, shifting away from the idea of the healthy workforce to another example, learning disability services. When we wanted to put together a new strategy for learning disabilities, it was very important that we didn't have separate conversations with professionals and with people that use services and carers, because if you just talk to professionals without involving those other voices, with the best will in the world, you're going to get assumptions made. It was important to have conversations with people with learning disabilities as part of that conversation as well. So when you're doing your discovery section, if you're running it as an event, which is the easiest way to do it and is the typical way of doing it, you'll have lots of people in the room who've all got a story to share about whatever it is you're looking at. And what we do at the discovery stage is put people together in pairs. And there's a reason why we want people to have paired conversations. It means that we can hear from everybody in the room, whereas if you do the kind of people around the table approach straight away, then you tend to get the dominant voices kind of saying what they want to say, and other people don't get heard so much. By talking in pairs, you get rid of that. And it's also a chance for people to learn from one another whilst they're answering our questions too. And typically at an AI event, when I ask people to work in pairs, I will try to look to connect diversity. So I've got people listening to stories that might be quite different from their own. So if you have got that learning disability event, you might have a service user talking to maybe somebody from the council that doesn't work in a frontline service and working together to answer each other's questions, to talk to one another about. We usually have interview sheets that we give everybody during this discovery interview, and the interview sheets will usually have 3 flavours of question on them. The first question we ask people is, tell me a story about a time when when something was good. So it might be for mental health, for example, tell us about a time you were supported to be independent and what helped you, and you can ask some prompting questions so that you can really tease out what was good about that. Why did that work well? Likewise, you could ask similar questions with learning disability. Oh, I've just had a note that there's been a technical issue, but hopefully that's been resolved and you can hear me now. Or, for example, another example of the tell me a story about, if you're working with a community and you want to understand what's going well in your community, you could say, tell me a time you've been inspired by some community. Tell me about what good looks like. And we're looking to hear, we want people's personal stories. We don't want to hear about what they think they know or what they heard from Joe Blogs in the office the other day or what they've read. We want to hear your personal experience of something good. So that's the first question we ask during our discovery interviews. The second one is usually, and what do you bring to this situation? And that's where we're asking people to think about their particular strengths that they're bringing to this situation. Because when you come to an Appreciative Inquiry event, you're not just there to tell me or whoever's facilitating what you think. You're there to also talk about what you can contribute to the situation. And the third question we ask people to talk about is, and if I had a wish about this, what would it be the opportunity for, what one thing would I change? So during discovery, we get people to talk with one another in pairs about those three things. You need to allow lots of time for that. Can I repeat question 2? Sorry, I'm just reading off the screen at the same time as talking to you. The question 2 was, what do you bring to the situation? So question 1 is, tell a story about a time when. Question 2 is, what do you bring to this situation? Which is encouraging people to think of their own contribution to whatever we're looking to discover. And question 3 is, what would you change for the future to make things better? So those are the 3 questions that we tend to ask during those discovery interviews. So people will talk together in pairs. Oh, I hear we're losing the signal. All sounds good now. Right, we're back again. Technical problems. Right, okay. It keeps interrupting my flow with these technical problems. Right, okay, so we've talked in pairs, had our conversations. We've maybe taken half an hour or so to have those conversations. This works really well when you do have a room full of hundreds of people, because it just comes alive with everybody chatting, which is all very nice for us as facilitators. And then what we do is we do get people to work in groups, and then they look for themes. What do all your stories have in common? So we can now start to bring an ingredients list of what good does look like. So when people have been supported to be independent, to live independently, what are the things that have most helped them to do that? Which you can probably see how that will start to inform the shape of our services. When people have been inspired in their communities, what kind of things have inspired them? What's motivated them? What's helped them? So by going from working in pairs to working in groups, we can start to distill the information that we're getting from stories. So it means that you don't have to have someone in the office going through all those stories to find the core elements. You get people to do that at your event or at a series of events. So I'm just going to move us on because I'm conscious of time. So then you move into the dream phase. So we've had our conversations about what we know works from our personal experiences, but now we want to create, and what is it we want to achieve? If things were at their best, what would that look like? We really encourage people to be creative here. So typically at an event, I will provide an array of creative materials, and I will set the scene and say maybe it's 3 years from now and services are working exactly as we would like them to do, and they're supporting people in the way that we know works best. What does that look like? So we will invite people in groups to build something that expresses what that vision looks like. Now, sometimes people feel a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of doing something creative, but there is a rationale to this. One, it is very inclusive, so we've got our mixed group of people in the room. It's something that everyone can get involved in. It doesn't matter how good you are with words or language or spelling, you can all get involved with it. and it does tend to be quite a fun and light-hearted thing for people to do. What I've learned, however, is to kind of give people permission to opt out, because not everybody does like drawing and creating things. So I usually say take part howsoever you wish. When they have created their dreams, right, I've seen some questions coming in, by the way, and what I'll do is answer those at the end, because I'm just going to skip through a little bit more and then I'll come back to your questions. After people have created their visions, their dreams, and they've shared their story of that too, because we'll typically go around the room and get people to tell us about what they've created and what it means to them. In the next part of the appreciative inquiry cycle is to translate that into language that will then drive the action planning that will come next. So this is where the next slide shows us the provocative propositions. We can just pop that one up, Karen. The next slide. There we are, super. Now, this isn't something I would talk about if I'm running an appreciative inquiry event. This is just for my audience today who are listening, just so you understand a bit about the technicalities of appreciative inquiry. When we're translating a vision into a provocative proposition, this is how we want to express it. So we try to create a written version of the dream that people have come up with that's provocative, it stretches and challenges, it's grounded, which it should be anyway, because all the stories that we had in the discovery phase show that there are examples to show we can reach this. It expresses a desired future, it's written in bold, positive language. It describes, it's written in the present tense as though we're already there. That's a little psychology trick. If any of you are into psychology, you might well be familiar with that kind of thing. Describe it as if it's already happened. Something that's used in cognitive behavioural therapy and so forth. And it's guiding. It actually says something about the work that's to happen. And this is where appreciative inquiry starts to get a little bit more technical and complex. So obviously we spend a bit more time explaining how you go about putting together a good provocative proposition on the training course that we do. But that's just to tell you about how the dream phase works. And then we move into the design. So if we just pop back to the wheel again, that shows you all the phases, the slide before, there we are. So then we go on to the design phase, which is your action planning. So this is now where you might want to use tools to help you with your action planning and your project building. The appreciative bit is really quite simple. We want to keep the momentum going, because those first two phases create quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of optimism for wanting to get going. So when we're designing our appreciative action plans, we really want to have some quick wins that we can crack on and do straight away. And in our design phase, we really want to involve people as much as we can during that process. So where we've been very inclusive up to now, ideally your design groups will want to keep some of that inclusivity too. And when we come to project planning with appreciative inquiry at this design phase, we're more agile than we are Prince 2, which Prince 2 is very much spend a lot of time getting your planning right first, whereas agile is let's just move with it and adapt and flex the project as we go along, which is much more what we kind of like to do with appreciative inquiry, really, to keep that momentum going. And then deliver, it's obvious, get on and do what you say you're going to do. And the AI cycle is always depicted as a cycle because you can just keep going back round and asking more questions and discovering as you go. So that's a very, running out of time actually, that's a quick summary of the cycle. So I think as we've got to near the end now, I better get to your questions. There's an awful lot more I could say to you, but you'll have to come on the course if you want to do that. Yeah, these are the AI principles that I was going to go through, but we're running out of time. Very quickly, heliotropic, grows towards the sun. Wholeness, we seek to involve the whole of the system. Constructionist, we create reality by the conversations that we have. I go into that a lot more on the course because that's an important principle. The poetic principle is about how we share stories. The anticipatory principle is the fact that we project ahead of us a future that we expect to happen. So we've got a chance to shape that. And simultaneity is how things change the moment you ask your first question. but I haven't really got time to go into those more, I'm afraid, because I want to answer your questions. And the one that's come up says, how do you facilitate those bigger groups to ensure that the dominant participant syndrome does not take over? Which is a very good question, and any of us at done consultation have had this issue. What I would say is, by the fact we start with talking in pairs, that really helps to water that down, because you've got one-on-one conversations happening, and each person in that pair has their chance to have their say with the other person listening and taking notes. So it takes away the group of 8 people where one person dominates. So you have had a chance for everyone to have their say. The second thing is, the way I tend to facilitate the groups is to have floating facilitators rather than table facilitators, because I want people to self-organise, because that's a big part of what AI is about. So I will tend to have people floating around and just keeping its ear in. And when we go from the paired conversations to the group work, then if we do have any people that seem to be dominating in a way that's not useful, then our facilitators can just kind of chip in and maybe make sure other people get a chance to have their say. I hope that answers that question somewhat. Do we have any other questions? Yep, it's all gone very quiet. No further questions. Right, well, in that case, I hope you have found today useful. It is a subject that I could talk about at great length, so I hope I've been able to make it clear to some extent what Appreciative Inquiry is about, and I hope you've enjoyed listening. So thank you very much for taking time out of your day, and I hope to meet some of you on forthcoming training courses or at the conference. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Sherry. Apologies, first of all, for the technical issues at the beginning of the webinar. That was all resolved, so hopefully you heard most of today's session. If you are interested in hearing more from Sherry, our next training course on Appreciative Inquiry is on the 9th of June in Birmingham, and as Sherry mentioned, it also features in this year's conference. We would very much appreciate your comments, so if you could spare a couple of minutes to leave your feedback, it would be very much appreciated. Again, apologies for the technical issues, and thank you for joining us. Have a very good day.